Today we have Chris Kaplan, visionary artist and Renaissance person, or jack of all trades, depending upon how you look at it. Really, really happy to have you here, Chris.
It's so great to be here, Armand. See you again. And Natalie, it's great to meet you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
So what have you been up to lately? You sort of disappeared off of some social media platforms, and it was a little harder to keep up with you. So what's your last year or so been like?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Let's go right into the fire. Yeah, I like to disconnect from technology and social media in general, but I'm still on like Twitter and Instagram, or getting back on when I tend to remember. But a lot of diving into my writing practices. Artwork practices have sort of adapted and changed, but still kicking it over at Astrology Hub, helping out over there. We're doing some beautiful things. And Metanoia.press is a new publication that I've been part of the editorial of Sangha, and we're putting out some really beautiful pieces that are ripening and coming along. So little of this, little of that, out in the woods quite often, and just kind of immersing myself in nature and just, going with the flow and ripening the practices.
You do a lot of your artwork shows a lot of nature. There's some of it is so, I don't want to say abstract, but some of it is so visionary, but very frequently like sort of rooted in nature and natural forms, right?
Yeah, I think that I call that, for me, my older style. It's kind of like kind of branched out and kind of evolved for the artwork portion of what I do, but very organic. And I feel like it does directly come from, working with plant medicines and that side of life and modality for me. So I can definitely see it. It's about this fluid, sort of not attached. There's no kind of preconceived notion sort of going in there, but just allowing that process to take over, and just let spirit sort of take over and see what kind of evolves and happens, and just be with it. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You were kind enough to send me one of your paintings, which actually I was going to be recording downstairs, where it was going to be sort of in the background, but I had to come up here and do it today. But just, I mean, talk about the meaning. We could talk about the influence, but it's beautiful stuff. I mean, my gosh.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. I don't hear it as often, because so often when we're talking about social media, we throw something out in the digisphere and it's kind of gone. It gets saturated in the feed, and obviously in-person shows weren't happening, and it's nice to hear. I remember that piece, and I'm glad you still have it, the goatfish one, I believe.
I still have it.
Well, everyone's moving around, shifting landscapes. It's hard to, another attachment.
No, it's there's a lot of things that are going to go before genuine piece of real artwork. I mean, there's some posters from the 80s that are going to go in the bin. So, Natalie, you really were you were taken by one of Chris's paintings, especially, weren't you?
Well, I mean, they are all so unique, aren't they? I mean, they're all totally their own creation. So but yeah, I was really really drawn to one of them with the cosmos. So it was the starry night, and then it was the organic plants, and just beautiful colors, and it seems to really resonate with today. I think that's why I was drawn to it, because I'm it's an eclipse and everything, and I've getting my telescope out.
Right on. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Was that painted a long time ago? You said it was one of your older styles.
If I'm thinking of the one you're talking about, yes. If it's sort of, well, what is time on this one? It very well could have been. It's an interesting thing. Like, that whole process was evolving. As art does, and your craft sort of deepens, and you also want to try new things and explore and push the boundaries of yourself, and just kind of going with that. And so there was two divergent threads. The older stuff, I kind of wanted to find a new way of kind of finishing that up. And that was always started off with more ink based. And also because the nature of that, that process was just, it takes a long time. And you have to like, I would be, dead maybe like every night for over a month trying to finishing that up. And with other priorities and responsibilities and other obligations and work, it's kind of hard to keep that sort of going. Then the newer process was more of this kind of cosmic splattering, which was super fun. It was a great cathartic release, and I really liked what was going with that. But it was working with some pretty hazardous sort of materials, with a lot of spray paints and these iridescent pigments that I like just toss around and see what sort of solidifies after. So I needed a respirator mask, and of course, and I had a fun Mercury retrograde story with that one. I was actually picking up supplies. It was right before, like, in New York City that, things were really, I'm in New Jersey, but, we're kind of tethered together in this. I was picking up new respirator masks. I just got one because it's all I needed at the time for my little painting session. I remember looking at the extra filters. I was like, oh, I'll come back tomorrow if I need them. And then boom, they're all gone. You can't get them anymore. And so I had to kind of let that go, and which is fine. That's also part of the whole artistic process. I think it's so much about letting go. And I think that's also a little joke of Armand, if he still has that painting. I mean, please, for me, like once it's finished, it's that creative process that is the nurturing journey. And then it's sort of out of your hands. It's gone. And had a very early experience with that. One of my very first shows where my whole portfolio at the time was stolen or destroyed after the exhibit. They had it was a pretty interesting experience, but it was like a early crash course on just being super not attached to what happens to them afterwards.
Because that really is something, isn't it? Because I think, I love art, but I am not someone who, it's not that natural talent that I've discovered, which, but I can imagine, actually for quite a few years, I was a portrait model for artists and for some artist friends and sculptors, and they, with some of them, I could kind of tell that they didn't always know when to finish, because they were just so enjoying the process that it was. I used to sense that that kind of like holding on of, let's just do some more weeks. Let's just, like, when is it perfect? Because is there ever a time? It's knowing. I guess so. The creative process is knowing, isn't it? When to.
Yeah, and I think like, it's also like you never really feel like that it is actually perfect. Like there's so many pieces, I think, like going along, I'm like, oh wow, this is maybe the best thing that's that I've seen sort of emerge. I love this thing so much, and then when it's over and done, I'm like, oh, I'm not really, no, it's not there. And then other people looking out, like they'll really love that particular piece, and I find that very, very interesting. So much like knowing the cutoff, and I think that's always a moving target, but that's fascinating to be on that that part of it, that process.
It is the process, isn't it? Right. I mean, I find that with writing, I mean, it's wonderful to have the concept of a book or something like that, and then you work through it and stuff like that, and then it gets out and you're so happy, you hold it in your hands and it's great and all of this type of, and then it's like, well, it's kind of yesterday's stuff. All of a sudden you sort of want to go on to the next project. You're not really, and then you got to like try to publicize it and all that kind of thing, and it's already sort of like, it's sort of out of your mind at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Writing is one, like my true passion and love as well. And I do like that it, you really do have a long-term enduring process with it. But the same thing, like you can go back and edit a piece over and over again, rewrite something and try to perfect it and hone it. Because we're always moving in time. We're always evolving and learning new things and looking at things with fresh eyes. So anytime you do step back and after a moment of time and then revisit a piece, you can rewrite that process and go on for infinity, really. So it's an interesting one.
It sounds like you're the art forms, the different modalities, creative modalities you use are so infused with your philosophy, spirituality, and understanding of planetary cycles, astrology, nature, shamanism. It's all, it's just all like weaved into who you are, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's particularly when we're talking about the painting and the art, that visual artwork process, that kind of evolved and emerged in me very like kind of later in life when I was starting to dive into these shamanic practices and really going back into like an eco psychology approach and reconnecting with the planet, with the earth, because that separation was the cause of so much of our psychological disorders, so much of our alienation that we feel. And that is the true connection or connectivity. So it did emerge as like a way to honor that, to sit with that, to as my meditation process was developing. And it kind of came with sort of that reciprocity, like that was kind of creating and sort of giving back to that and honoring of Gaia and that spirit. And then obviously the writing goes hand in hand, primarily with my fiction, and I love stories and mythology, and that was sort of my real passion and love for academia and college, and prior to that the high school, and then but that emergence with awakening sort of to that shamanic inner sort of spirit, and that that divine presence that's in everything. I think that's so yeah, it definitely came from a place of honoring.
Mm. Have you so the books that you've written,
Yeah,
you've written a few, haven't you?
I have, but they're in a interesting place. I'm still finding sort of homes for them in like traditional publishing routes, but I have screenplays that are doing. One of them is an adaptation of one of my novels, and it's a screenplay is doing really well. It has won a bunch of awards and festivals and things like that. So I love the screen medium too. So I was trying to. There's an endless process. I loved adapting some of the prose stories into screenplays, excuse me, and vice versa, because I think it just kind of see things from different angles and reflective sort of eyes, and yeah, and
Wow.
I'm just happy doing it. For me, just I get so much sustenance from it, and
I can just see and feel the joy.
I absolutely love it. It's
So
like
you
my one
must kind
true
of get
love.
up in the morning and just think, wow,
Yeah,
I get to
oh,
create today.
absolutely. It's a perfect day for me is just waking up. I can, dive in for unabashed. There's no obligations. I can just go and surrender to that flow state and then hop out into the forest after, get a little movement, and then dive back into it, maybe read a little bit. So I love the written word. It's such a beautiful thing. I think we have this ultimate link to another person's consciousness that's sort of unfiltered, and obviously the psychedelic sort of unfolding that happens in your consciousness when you're reading something. We're really getting downloads from a whole another world that's happening and shaping into our consciousness, and that is pretty magical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you work with are you a psychedelic practitioner as well? I mean, do you help other people with?
Yes, but not actively like actively going out to approach to help people, but I definitely have very dear loved ones or people that kind of come to your life and through synchronicity. But I was very fortunate to be able to work with, I mean, I can add Armand to this list, but years ago being able to do so many webinars with these beautiful minds and speakers and some of my anthropological heroes and stuff like that. So all these mentors and allies are sort of all over the place, and it is a problem that we had in the West, where diving into these practices and being introduced to indigenous plant wisdom, and obviously the advent of like different chemical pharmaceuticals, psychedelics, we have no teachers and no guides for that. So like people were diving into this, and that's also part of the initiatory process. You dive into the abyss, so to speak, and you have to learn to sort of swim. And but other cultures would have this practice of guidance and mentorship that will help you through that. Like the shaman will help you through that ceremony, guide you. Obviously, that process is yours alone, but you're sort of like in a canoe. You're not just trying to swim across the Atlantic or something.
By yourself with no guidance. But it looks like things seem to be changing a bit in the West with that, doesn't it?
It is like
I'm hearing a lot
legality.
about different developments with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a lot of it came from like the opening that happened in the 60s and 70s, and then as those guides and those seekers became the mentors at that point, and so many are really championing putting the benefits of psychotherapy and things like that. Like there's a lot of benefits, and so we're learning a lot.
I think it's a great thing, and I have a little bit of hesitation with the idea that the way we do things, that we're kind of medicalizing psychedelics. You've got to have the right diagnosis before you sort of get approved, like that type of thing. And I think when it comes to guides and so on, I'm not entirely sure that from other cultures like the shamanic model, that it necessarily, I mean, it would work for a lot of people, but I'm not saying that it necessarily is the best, as a general type of thing. And I think about the guides and so on. It's like, well, they really seem to come from people that have had the experience enough to be able to say something about it. But we could use something a little bit more formal, and yet I'm not quite sure where we're going to get that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, because it is such a moving landscape, and obviously it's built up on our environmental and educational sort of conditioning. And then I think that the part of that natural process, when you start dismantling that, then you're trying to seek, like, rebuild your kind of your whole formation of reality. And yeah, I don't think there would be like one sort of solution for that either. I think it's so much attributed to your personal sort of quest. Like it helps, obviously, the awakening to that pulse that there is that divine presence. And obviously then you have to dismantle your wounds around all religious experiences, and that's a heavy one, and that comes up like a lot in the West, especially around Christianity and healing wounds from around those alienation sort of doctrinations. Then you can sort of see the whole integral web of reality and theories, that it's like that divine pulse beat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that we really pulled ourselves away from religion quite a bit lately, which is kind of good, because of because like our relationship, like the relationship to the divine, in the West has largely been one of fear, and the injunction has been obedience. I mean, it's really, it's kind of harsh, and then our other alternative has been that sort of, materialistic science that is just, everything is just dead matter, and I think, psychedelics are one of the things that bridge that gap, but we don't have the language even to really deal with it,
No, and that's the part of the thing too. It's like you're trying to, describing the ineffable. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is say like the past 5,000 years is like that storyline that that's sent through the Kali Yuga cycle, into that ultimate dark age at this point, where it was all, before it was about that direct experience with divinity, with spirit, whatever you want to call it. Then that separation came, and that kind of alienation that kind of came after that, and obviously the diminishment of the feminine, which was a major part of it. Then that whole separation from that we are not, we're a part of a part of nature, not a part of it. And that is a huge thing. And I think that sort of led to everything has a cause and effect, and obviously a purpose, and that's part of the storyline that kind of unfolds too. But it is beautiful to see that. I think that's really, obviously it's not happening as fast as we want, but we're talking about long-term processes. So like on the beautiful side, it is unfolding. We are kind of returning and remembering that direct connection and that purpose of honoring the earth, and we are a part of it, that symbiosis, that everything is intimately connected. And that goes hand in hand of how honoring the feminine and not having that separation between those things, obviously the patriarchal landscape, and then how do we dismantle that? And it's there's good and bad in either approach, but obviously that, that thing that we can just kind of take everything that we want, and that there is no reciprocity, and that, things will be sort of, this bottomless well. And I think that that approach is very dangerous. And, especially as we, going off into the space age, and we're going off, trying to, colonize Mars, colonize the moon, and then, onto Jupiter and so forth. If we don't like return to that process of like, that we're kind of carrying around this scarcity mindset that, then down the road that, it doesn't matter how large the universe is, nothing is ever going to be enough. And I think we are sort of we're trying to return to balance. There's like these two approaches, like that transhumanist approach where, leave everything kind of behind, master our own sort of destiny. And then, but then like, you can look at it like in, there's beautiful communities like in Baltimore and Detroit in the States, where you're trying to bring permaculture practices and urban farming and repurpose land, and how do we develop true community, and realizing that, we aren't separate from nature, and we have to kind of bring things into sort of balance, and then really thrive. And so I kind of see that beautiful things happening, and obviously we have a lot of work to do.
Interesting times to be alive, aren't they?
It's fascinating.
I mean, historic.
Yeah, totally historic. And do you feel like that I know there's a lot of views that we come here with a sort of remembering why we're here. We come with a soul contract sort of thing, or a sacred mission. And do you feel that way? Both of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't until I was 20 that I didn't really know what I was doing here. And then when I discovered New Age and spirituality, I thought, right, okay. But up until then, it was I just didn't know what my, and then it started to sort of make sense. I thought, oh, yes. Right. And then I felt like the real school started, the real learning.
Yeah. Oh, I could.
When I yeah. And so yeah, it feels like a really important one.
Yeah.
Actually, really important. And
I'm just some kind of little worker bee in the whole scheme of things. I just, I don't know. I mean, there's a soul contract purpose to be here. I try to do my little best on things and stuff like that. It doesn't seem like I'm bringing too much to the game, but I'm trying real hard.
It's not true.
But yeah, I feel like the thing is that, like when you're talking about these two different, the back to the earth on the one hand recognition, and then the sort of the transhumanism perspective on the other. And I can't help but think that, I mean, it's wonderful. We are seeing things that are truly, we got a little glimpse of them like 50 years ago for a moment, and then they just like evaporated, it seems like, for a very long time. Yeah. Or they went way underground, or it was certainly not the easiest thing to find, and you had to really search it out. And now it's become part of like
now it's become culture. Sort of in the early. I mean, I remember in 90. I think it was 1996, 97, 98. Around that time was really. It felt like it was really happening, and then and then I don't know that I think the 2012 and the the new millennium, it just moved on to something different. I suppose it became more like tech age, didn't it? I think things changed when I got my mobile phone.
That's what did
oh my
it.
gosh,
my first computer.
Yeah, and I think that part of that was like just we had this more connectivity, obviously, with the way the technologies, everything's sort of been advancing, that we aren't completely separated, that we can we have more access to all the variety of wisdom that sort of evolved locally and then became more translocally. And I think that's a huge part of it. And there's it's less barriers of communication. And even though we try to, either if it's censorship of oversaturation or pure censorship, I mean, there's still that level that there's a lot of information we gotta like dissect and kind of dissimulate and go through and integrate. but we have that connection, and like that wisdom is there, and I feel like that has become, it's not closed off to particular cultures anymore. And I'm not talking about a cultural appropriation, but a lot of these like shamanic practitioners, excuse me, ayahuasqueros and things, like you realize that this plant intelligence, this plant life, and I'm, speaking of like ayahuasca in particular, it's for humanity. It has a sort of mission and consciousness around it, and a lot of that is about healing. So much of the Western mindset's there of that alienation and separation again. And I think primarily with like Western peoples, we've been so far removed from the, that indigenous and traditional inheritance, so that we came from a shamanic background as well. And that's been sort of glossed over and buried under, the wave of Christianity that kind of swept over, and diminishing that feminine angle, and a lot of those practices were lost and they weren't in the written record. And where are those elders? So it's kind of like looking within to kind of come back to those practices and adopt the modalities of other cultures too, because they are coming from that shared angle that unites us all, that we are humans, our brains work in the similar way. And then when you use that just biodynamic sort of instrument to access those same stages, we come to the same source. Even though our cultural filters may be slightly different, the linguistics behind it are varied, they're saying the same thing, just a different way.
Yeah.
Seems like time is a factor now. I mean, because we are just having all of these awakenings to all of these things that are, and there is so much communication, and it is so great, but time is a factor. I think that maybe is what transhumanism is all about. Like, well, maybe Mars is the answer or something like that. But we have so much opportunity for growth and expansion and knowledge, but a lot of folks, they'll have to make a big change pretty quick.
Well, we got the Bell riots coming up in 2024, so I'm sort of a sci-fi nerd. It was part of Deep Space Nine, and it was a big that storyline was a big climatic sort of shift to bring over into that space age of this united kind of front, where we do have all the resources we need, and it doesn't have to be this elitism or this again, back to that scarcity mindset. Like the earth has everything that it's bountiful, and we could provide for everyone. And it's really, how do we repurpose that, rethink, and sort of step into that, and letting the old ways go, which is, as you both know, is so much of this process of Pluto and Capricorn. And that's been ongoing, and we're shedding that, and we're learning to let go, let die to our ways, and kind of be reborn with that, which is such a shamanic way of life. And I was thinking, when you were mentioning about like the 60s and 70s and popping into 2012, obviously the Pluto Uranus conjunction and the square that happened, and that whole long-term birthing moment. So it's really fascinating, because all these
we had a freeze.
Oh, we've got a freeze.
Because we're talking about Uranus.
You're back. Yeah, exactly. It was what you were talking about.
Uranus would have none of you talking about him, huh?
Couldn't handle the energy.
Of course.
Pluto.
Oh, good gosh.
I mean, eclipses are very Uranian anyway, aren't they?
Always. The
Yeah,
Uranus moment before we discovered Uranus, where we had eclipses and a few other things that seemed to be Uranian in there.
So how all the the Pluto in Capricorn, the wisdom traditions at its best, going back to the wisdom traditions, bringing that forward.
Absolutely. Kind of like, in my mind, it kind of like feels like that grandmotherly wisdom. It's very feminine to me, and it's that deep-rooted mystery, and we're totally reawakening to it. But like Armand said too, like it's not like that we have to, I think, stop or progress or the development of science. Like that's become a sort of beautiful sort of angle too, and there's a lot of throwing around like these biblical terms like salvation in it. I don't know if that's coming up for a while. But like, so it's not like a return to old, completely old ways. It's reimagining our
Really.
lives, returning to the wisdom. Let's keep, bring that and into
the
balance.
best of all of the things. So it's like putting
Yes, thank you.
through a filter, saying, Pluto and Capricorn, it's not all the negative things. It's like there are just nothing ever is it? It's some really good bits of that, some really good parts to keep, and then some things to let go of and regenerate and revamp, and but just not to throw the baby away with the bathwater, so to speak. I think
exactly.
it's that alchemical process, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's so attributed to like being a cardinal Earth sign. I think, we wrap Capricorn around Saturn, and we feel like, because it is, rolling Saturn, that fixed sort of sign, but it's not completely fixed. It's that constant rebuilding, that constant creation, and climbing that mountaintop, and that's a very movement-oriented piece.
And also remembering that the glyph of Capricorn is the tail going into the depths of the ocean. The mythic part.
Yeah, bringing that mythic dimension into physical reality, like coming out of the water into land with it, and that's a constant process. And that's also a bottomless well. That inspiration, that mythic landscape is endless, and we can always dive into it and bring up the source of wisdom and bring it back to earth. And thank you for bringing that up, because that's we forget about that. We always think it's a sea goat. There's some magic.
Exactly. It's a goat. I mean, as I said, I just thought about it in that moment. That's often kind of what I tend to do in these conversations. It's like it's what's coming in, really.
Oh yeah. Little stream of consciousness. Let's just go with it.
Well, Neptune and Pisces too. Neptune and Pisces. The boundaries get mighty thin, dissolved. And the last time Neptune went through Pisces, we had the big spiritualist movement. That was in the States and in England especially, but throughout the world. I mean, throughout. Well, I don't know throughout the entire world. I think a lot of the world was pretty spiritualist to begin with, but it certainly opened up things. It certainly opened up things in the West quite a bit. And I was seeing a friend play at a bar, before the pandemic, and he was doing a guitar thing and all that. And I'm talking to a guy, at the corner, and it was the type of time like we would have typically spoken about the Mets or something like that, and he was telling me about how he gets signs from his deceased father that the garage lights go on and off, and it's like this is not the conversation you would have had with somebody at a pub. I mean 20 years ago, if they thought that, they weren't sharing it like one beer into a stranger. Hey, Neptune and Pisces, like, oh yeah, I get visits from spirit world,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I enjoy those conversations quite often, that they sort of happen and unfold, and all the synchronicities. We really do. I feel like if we leave ourselves kind of open, I think we kind of, our culture and our conditioning is like we keep ourselves sort of closed off. It's self-preservation, obviously, and part of that. But that constant reminds us to leave our sort of hearts sort of open, surrender to what's sort of happening and all those synchronicities that kind of happen. But those conversations are super entertaining when they happen. And random, you're right about the Neptune connection. I'm a little personal bias because I have, I'm a Pisces rising, and I have, Venus and Mars, T squares, Neptune, and my moon. So I'm very Neptunian. So
that doesn't surprise me at all. I haven't looked at your chart, but that does not surprise me. I was thinking, where's the Pisces? Where's the Neptune?
Oh yeah. Mars is 29 Pisces, and it's conjunct Venus at 0 degrees Aries, and then it squares Neptune and my moon in Cancer. So it's
you've both got moon in Cancer.
That's right.
Mine's a Scorpio rising. That's pretty much the only water except for Cancer South Node.
Oh, that's odd. Scorpio rising. That's an awesome placement. Just Scorpio's that sign of Scorpio. I mean, I'm also a little biased with that too, because it's such a shamanic sign and signature, and that connection to that deep wellspring of memory, and it's fascinating. Obviously, we were getting a lot of taste of that being in Scorpio season, and all the transits that are happening. And whew.
You're both Neptune. You're both Neptune and
Sagittarius.
Yeah.
I'm Neptune 6 Sagittarius.
Yeah, I'm Neptune and Capricorn, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, Capricorn and Jupiter. Jupiter and Neptune.
I thought you. So you are. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
quite a few years later.
Wise beyond your years.
Yeah.
I have Neptune and Scorpio, and it's a pretty wonderful placement. I think it was an interesting time, interesting generation, and it's squaring my Sun and Saturn and Mercury. So it brings it in personally, but Neptune and Scorpio really sort of highlights that scorpionic energy, in a unique kind of way.
Absolutely. And I think those squares too are such, they're pivotal for that creative process. And I know you're very musical, and that outlet is a part of you too. And that's, I feel without that tension, there's nothing to create. Everything's sort of like super easy and flowy, and it just, well, we can work with everything. but it's nice to have that tension. That's like the beautiful part of that.
I've gotten complaints from people that have very easy charts. It's like, well, it's not exactly a complaint. It's like, well, everything works out okay, but nothing much happens.
That sounds amazing.
Depending upon how you spend your days, it doesn't sound half bad. So are you basically, well, I take it you're optimistic for your future, your place. But what about our collective? What about our collective stuff? How does that land for you?
It depends on the day. It depends on the day. Sometimes I'm more optimistic humanity, and I'm thinking I'm wallowing. It's vice versa. But no, I do feel like, this might be just like the Jupiter in my chart, Jupiter in conjunct Mercury, and I always have a very optimistic outlook, because just, in the end, everything is okay, right? Anyway,
yeah.
Like we do, we're going through another mass extinction most likely, and things like that, but like this has all happened before, and it's not our sort of first rodeo with this. And eventually the solar system sort of dies, and galaxies collide and things like that. So that's always a part of it.
I always there's people that worry about heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
We got a few hurdles to get through before we worry about that.
Yeah. It's true, but obviously last year, or what we're in now, is super interesting for sure. I feel like there was a lot of great teaching that came out of it. The blessing there was like, we really kind of, especially at that beginning of that pandemic stage, where we started like really simplifying and sort of slowing down, and then really thinking about the relationships that are of the utmost importance to us, and forging new bonds with those. And then like also just learning patience. Obviously, if we were kind of in like depending where we are on the planet, phases of lockdown and stuff like that, and really having to go inward, which for me is like so much of a Capricornian process too, of what we have transiting there, where we really have to kind of like obviously simplify, like I mentioned, and step back, going inward, that period of peace and silence, which this is like very hard. It's a hard process, and especially if you're kind of thrown into it. If you say like, it's easier, said than done. If I've been meditating for years and had those kind of disciplines in place, and I, realize when my body needs the yoga, or I need something to go exercise, but like to cut ourselves off from that too, it was very difficult. And it's obviously so much trauma that kind of unfolded with that. But at the same time, like there was such wisdom and stillness that was emerging. I felt like, now we're kind of like forgetting that a little bit, that rush to get back to normal, which was, do we really want to get back to that normal, that constant, perpetual, kind of insatiable maw of capitalism, and everything is constantly going, and I don't know if that's necessarily, it's not my ideal. Personally, I would like to, get back more to nature, more stillness, and I loved having no traffic on the roads. And that was,
Okay, I know. So, full moon in Taurus, exalted, nature,
it
peace,
is, it's
slowing
the
down to
one.
smell the roses, and mindfulness, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And that's like, they're the greatest teachers. Like, so, going out in the forest, just being with the trees, and that patient wisdom that is there. And, that was one really beautiful thing that I saw, especially towards the beginning of that, the pandemic experience, and then maybe into, in the States, like toward that spring and summer, where I
Mhm.
saw, everyone was kind of returning to the woods. There's
Yeah,
so many, I never saw so many families out hiking
yeah.
and just, being merging. And I was like, that was so beautiful to me. Because obviously there was that craving for connection, and realizing, that is there, and also just to be out in the world. What is, life really about?
Well, yeah,
And right.
it's such a gift, really. And coming across creatures I haven't seen here before. Snakes, quite a lot of snakes.
Awesome.
A scorpion. I'm not sure
Wow,
that.
really?
Yeah. Seeing all these muntjac deer. Just so many. It's like they were all kind of coming out. Loads of butterflies.
Yeah, yeah,
I
I
hadn't
definitely,
seen butterflies like that for years. When they're all there's just so
yeah,
many of them. I thought some of them were becoming extinct. So, on that level, how how
yeah,
incredible, really. What?
absolutely. It was
Yeah.
really beautiful. That's very similar experience here as well. And it just was like, all this life that was sort of hibernating, and having to, just because our modern lifestyles were just so alien, they're not welcoming to that. And this is a big thing. Like, we do have these disciplines and practices. I'm thinking of looking at Dow Orion's book, Beyond the War of Invasive Species. It's a beautiful book, and it's a lot of it's about dismantling the lingo and the linguistics around what an invasive species is, and realizing that, the Earth has this biodynamic sort of process and intelligence that, a lot of times these new species come into a certain niche to fill a niche that's sort of been, to be nitrogen fixers, fix the soil, and kind of grow all, rebalance the kind of, excuse me, the effects of the modern world and the modern sort of landscape that sort of dismantle things, and to bring, restore the balance. Then obviously, the one last little thought on the pandemic storyline, when we looked at um, all the riverways and the channels and the canals kind of clearing, and the air pollution lessening. And I thought that was, obviously very beautiful, and it's whatever on an aesthetic level, but that was a very short turnaround. Like, we really, I feel like, can balance out and fix things pretty rapidly if we actually decide to do it. And then that's been like the biggest barrier right now, is that, do we have to make a conscious choice collectively if we want to do this? And obviously, the politicians and everyone that's kind of involved in these industries have to make that sort of conscious choice too. And but we can, I feel like that was a greatest sign that we can actually do that. And yeah.
Yeah, it's also very encouraging that there are any number of people who, like that race to get back to normal. Like, a lot of folks don't really feel that, and a lot kind of do, but then they kind of like say, nah, I'm not, I don't want to be all the way back in anymore. I think that it did, sort of knock a lot of people out of that, like the habitual patterns that we were in beforehand.
Absolutely.
Which is a positive thing for sure. So this has been a great talk. What is like if you have a clue, what's next for you? What are you thinking about doing?
Next for me,
Yeah,
personally, or
well, your
collectively?
project. You know, this is where we will see Chris Kaplan doing X.
Yeah. Well, this creative phase that I go in, obviously towards the end of the year, it takes a lot of stock and harvest. I'm typing up. We had a very prolific spring and into summer, starting a new novel that I have 5 notebooks to type up, so I'm slowly typing those up. Then eventually I'll get those into some sort of phase of completion, but that's down the road. But the have some new pieces kind of coming on in Metanoia.press, and that's a beautiful publication trying to go more of a non-dualistic approach. Started by a professor at Penn State, or Rich Doyle, brilliant. He'd love to introduce you both to him. You would love him, but kind of going on to a more non-dualistic approach of things. So we have beautiful things in the works there, and then like the community side of me, still helping out quite often with Astrology Hub, and we're always doing beautiful things, and have a good forecast panel coming up that they love to do every year. So everyone that's astrology inclined can check that out, and I'll be kind of opening up to more readings and things like that, as life kind of pushes you into new directions, and I'm trying to surrender to that. And otherwise, I'm going to keep creating. I have a good move kind of coming up ahead, and going to get out into nature more, so I'm looking forward to that. And I am working on a book on the runes and their connection with astrology, but that's down the road. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you don't ask me that question, because I wouldn't have anything like that to throw out. But yeah, that's great stuff. That's a lot of activity. It's a lot of creativity.
Yeah, hey.
We will put links to all of this as well, your websites and
thank you.
all of these.
Everything will be down there.
So
well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. Really, this is a wonderful talk.
Thank you both. It was great to see you, and thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Really enjoyed this. Thank you. Lovely to meet you.